Today, we're joined by Dr. Charles Veys, founder of FOTENIX. This is a company that's advancing crop diagnostic platforms using advanced imaging and AI. We'll explore how this tech gives farmers a new layer of visibility and what it means for the future of agriculture. Welcome, Charles. You're joining us from across the pond today. Our audience is oftentimes in North, Central, and South America, so we're all excited to have you on as a guest today.
Thank you very much for having me, Mark. Yeah, excited to do this.
So with FOTENIX in your company, based in Western Europe, but I think you have a good presence that you're building all around the world, right? There's quite a need for farmers to better understand a lot of things about their crops. What got you into this, developing this business?
That's a good question. I kind of fell into it, to be honest. I was a machine vision engineer, so working on what was at the time software before it kind of fell into the AI space. It was offered a position as a research associate in the Syngenta Centre. It's a place in Manchester that really works on projects brought to them by growers to do with challenges that they'd found on farms. So at that time, this was sort of 11 years ago or so, it was green on green. So looking for weeds in lettuce or protein content of wheat, so variable rate nitrogen kind of questions. It allowed me to kind of inadvertently ride a wave of consumer electronics, so what Nvidia and Sony were bringing out, what was possible in that area, and the kind of processing power that was capable, and really understand how it can be applied. And I saw a sort of a bit of a common theme. Obviously, price point is always a big discussion point in this sector, and trying to find a platform that could be used. A lot of my research group were working with the Gates Foundation and actually taking this platform out into really sub-Saharan Africa. So really price was quite a big drive of or a theme within the group at the time. But my main focus was in the sort of more developed agriculture to try and see how far we could push what some sites had published and demonstrated, but no one was providing commercially at that time. Obviously, a lot has happened since then.
So from the perspective of your customer base, the growers, what is it that they're looking to have you guys do for them?
That's a really good question. I think it depends on the farm, but the main question is we get a list of this is what I can't do, or I've tried X and Y and it doesn't help me. So we have three core offers. They kind of sit between crop scouting, which is clipping our equipment onto trolleys or tractors, equipment going around the farm and looking for specific problems. That could be pest outbreaks or disease, kind of generating maps, but detailed maps where they can act on them within hours or days. We also do quality control, so lots of outlets trying to grade things for retailers, premium, grade A, grade 1, sizing, that kind of thing on the outlets of the more automated sites. We work a lot with the controlled environment agriculture. And then the final ones are kind of where it all comes together, which is resource planning. So based on the information that we provided them, where should they be sending people out? Where should crop thinning be happening? Where should they apply biologicals? That kind of interaction. So it sounds all encompassing, but we're really only doing the one sensing bit and then informing that operation. So it's all about embedding something within the farm so that they can act in a new way and not have to recruit teams of data science and the like. So that's kind of why we deem under that ability provision, which is an all-encompassing term, but really it's enabling farmers to focus on farming and get new information that fits within their margins.
So I assume you're really getting more information than they can maybe even handle themselves and whatnot. Tell us about the information flow as you gather data, how you understand what it is to pass on to the farmer and how they can use that data.
It's a really good question. I think over the years, we've become really good knowing what we don't need, because we have to price a service. We have a flat monthly fee. So that we price a service to the farmers based on the value that's going to offer to them. And the real onus is on us to make sure that we can remove the processing cost to a point where we can actually generate a business within that. And sometimes that's more difficult or easily said than done. Insights with good infrastructure and good connections, we can do a lot of it with the help of our friends at Amazon, AWS. And that's great. We can start by uploading as much as possible and going through that. Loads of farms don't have that capability. And so we have to work at sort of data dimensionality reduction, as it's called. So rather than uploading raw captures or images or scans, because we're creating 3D reconstructions of farms here. This is quickly falls into terabytes each time you go out to take a capture. But actually the end result, an end map or a spray map is kilobytes. It's tiny. So how much of that we deploy locally and how much we end up placing on a site with capital versus how much we rely on wider infrastructure and connectivity really is a site-by-site basis. And we have quite a intensive suitability process because we have like a 90-day guarantee. If the grower doesn't like that they can give it back, and that we lose money on that. We do grade the grower at the beginning to make sure that it's going to be beneficial for both of us, and there is that discussion. But yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head. Is we're quite good, or we've become very good at making large amounts of data into small amounts of information that's actually useful. And when everyone talks about data and who owns data, and which normally the growers, but what they actually want is the end result, the insight, the recording, the map. What they don't want is a 3D reconstruction. No one's hosting virtual environments of farms as of yet. We'll see what happens at the likes of Meta and Nvidia with the cost of those platforms. But for now, those insights are really what we're getting good at handing around and sharing within the growers' ecosystem.
There's 10 years ago when I was more active as a grower, the amount of data we had available was quite thin. In an early company based in Estonia, I had some involvement with Vital Fields. It was amazing to me as they went out and developed, mapping resources and even data resources for the different farmers, just how little data, going back only 10 years ago was out there. And the type of data you're talking about with multispectral imaging and 3D, mapping for these things, it's just amazing the changes and the developments that have happened these farmers, and that they can actually use some of this data as actionable intelligence now.
Yeah, it happened over time. It wasn't overnight. We've been going for 7.5 years now, and in the first few years, we were working almost exclusively with breeders and sites doing sort of plot trials or greenhouses where they had a huge amount of infrastructure, and there was a lot of focus on data sovereignty and security and where that data was hosted. So it gave us a lot of time to develop the capability to move large amounts of data and also work out how much it actually costs. And then going, oh, actually, you're looking for slugs, so we only really need this amount of information and we can only capture this. We do like to err on the side of caution occasionally. Most of the time, what growers rank in the top 5 at the beginning of a year and what is at the end of the year looks very different. And so we've got to be careful not to throw anything away. So we have a bit of redundancy of what we can capture and what we can go back to or evaluate. But yeah, at the moment, you have to be realistic. And data, there's a pound per gigabyte cost for moving things around, and we've got to make sure it stays minimal, much like plants. Plants cost a lot to ship around and move. We don't want to do it as much as possible.
So you're in a space where there's other people, other brilliant companies and brilliant scientists and things like that developing some of these solutions. What gives your FOTENIX an edge? Do you think it's sensor quality, AI data, some of the training that you can do? What are things that give you an edge in this business?
Honestly, it's a bit of a combination. Particularly from the UK, there's not many companies of our type that have been around as long as we have. It's a kind of sink or swim industry, and there aren't many organic growth companies. You either kind of get bought out or you don't. And I think we're one of the few that were focusing on sort of unit economics rather than rapid traction, but before it became trendy. And I think that was just the route that we took. It wasn't any sort of great foresight or anything, but it's paid dividends. I think now our real USP is that we have a nice family of patents that protect the hardware and the method. And really what that allows us to do is create detailed spectral captures of a plant for a very low cost. And that's very difficult to replicate. With that, we often see competitors that can replicate the same quality of data at a much different price point and more within where we started, which was the R&D element, but with sort of 5 to 10x higher bill of materials than us. The software and the model is really what generates the revenue for us now. And if there was a cheaper alternative to the hardware that came up, it would happen relatively seamlessly. I think our big technical USP is that we take into account shape without going into boring biology. Plants really within light act like disco balls. You shine different colors of light at a plant and it looks completely different depending on where you look.
A different story.
And that is why lots of people that use drones or other applications get very variable results, because it's very difficult unless you record that shape and remove that shape. But it's something that's been known a long time in plant science and breeding, but it's very difficult unless if you look at what the kind of research institutes in places like the Netherlands, they can showcase with millions of dollars worth of equipment what's technically feasible versus what's commercially feasible. And I think we hit a bit of a sweet spot at the time where we were able to get an apparatus that did that. As I mentioned, data for us is owned by the client, not us. And we have some rather large clients, especially AgChem corporates that dictate that. But I think it works. The trick for us is really which clients we can get to allow us to aggregate that. So most of the growers are quite keen to share their results in terms of shared models because they all benefit from each other. So there's no data transfer between sites, but one grower will benefit from a pest model that's been developed for the others. Other sites don't like doing that, which is sort of more for their R&D purposes because they want exclusive models, but we've got developed enough infrastructure to do that. I wouldn't say nowadays data is very important in terms of our USP, but it is what we use to generate the items. A bit of a trifecta of the three together. And then the other thing is we're quite good at saying no. It sounds odd, but there's so much to do in this sector, and we're already covering, detection, which is a small part of a few. As soon as it can be done from a drone, as soon as it can be done from a satellite, as soon as it can be done from a color camera RGB, we say it's no point. We're here to sit in a space where you can't do it. If that's within an order of magnitude of what you can cost, there's no point us chasing that avenue. There's a long list of things that we need to do, and that helps us, but it also builds trust because we get lots of potential clients that come back to us and say, you gave us a list of what you could do, you pointed us in this direction, and now actually one of these things has come up. And it's a big sector, but it's a very small echo chamber. And if many companies have done, if you sell things you can't do, growers share information very quickly, and
you go out of business very
won't
quickly
last
that way.
Yeah, completely. And it's happened time and time again. I think lots of people come from the tech industry and other industries and think that they can just fall into farming. Farmers will buy stuff. They won't. Farmers are very good businessmen. And if it doesn't apply, they'll know someone that's an early adopter and very quickly find out whether something works, and it's not worth it.
You've referenced a few times in our conversation so far the pricing model. So talk to us a little bit about that, where you're at now and what you've learned along the way, and what pricing model is acceptable.
It took us quite a long time, but the model that we ended up with for the past 18 months or so is a flat fee, effectively a flat monthly fee. And the kind of the size of the fee and the minimum term really depends on the site and the level of automation. That is because growers don't want to buy kit. They don't want more hardware. This is not a tractor or a capital. This is something that is relatively new to them. They want a capability and they want a bit of trust in that. So I think with our kind of 90-day trial period, which we have very good success of converting at the moment, and also our ability to say, well, this is not going to be a capex. This is going to sit within an opex and can quite quickly, within months, show you kind of return on investment initially. A lot of what we're doing initially is displacing labor, stopping people spending a lot of time crop walking around healthy areas and moving them to treating the areas where there's a problem. So you get a very quick return on investment. And then we start to scale it up and say, well, actually, we were scouting for this, but while we were running a camera over, we can start doing yield forecasting. We can start to add these different layers to it. It's a subscription model, and we typically have 12 months, 10 months, depending on the season that the site has term lengths. But we have some really small growers that are running on kind of less than $50 a day kind of subscription. So it can range. We typically like the much bigger sites because they give us the big impact and they can act on them. So we have some sites with fully autonomous production from sort of seeding through to harvest where no human touches them. And our cameras can do huge amounts in that area because it can be acted on straight away and it's quite reliable. So there aren't many of those sites. So if you know any, please get in touch. But those are the ones that can really benefit. And then we try and trickle down the benefits to the wider market, which doesn't have that level of focus. At the moment, the sweet spot's very much controlled environments, so greenhouses, polytunnels. But there is some future work coming in the less controlled environments. We've done a bit of R&D in orchards and arable. The challenge there is not technical; it's more commercial business model. How I can show you patches of fungal infection in your field of wheat. So what? And that's the challenge we're trying to answer at the moment when regulation, when subsidies, when agronomy services align to allow that level of detail within that sector, which so far from what we've seen, we're a bit of a way off, I believe anyway.
Can you give us kind of a case study, case scenario of some actual outcomes that you've seen from some growers that you can cite?
The biggest one is normally about resource efficiency. So we've had some where we'll install things on the sort of the harvesting line. So at the end where they're doing quality assurance, they might have anywhere between 2 and 4 people manually picking that crop, taking measurements, manual measurements, recording things with a ruler. And so we can, within 24 hours can displace that. And that's really basic, but it's super valuable. And that's kind of with most of our cases, that's normally where we get our foot in. Even with some of the sites that are doing things in like strawberries, things like flower counts, things that you wouldn't need the spectral camera for, but it's like, well, now we've done the flower count, we can grade the fruit and we can look at bricks content, we can start to do the adder. So it's always getting our foot in the door with something that makes a maximum impact for them, which is often not purely focused on our strength and then bringing in our strength, which is where we kind of outline ourselves versus the competitors. Reduction in time. So we liked in really nice environments, we can reduce the time to detect a pest or disease outbreak by about 80%. And what does that mean in real time? It basically means weeks rather than days. So if you're going to apply a difference, I think we've seen some sites where they can have over $100,000 worth of damage within a few weeks if left unchecked, especially in the sort of glasshouse environment. Plants and pest is very, very similar that they thrive in. And so those are some really nice cases. But again, we have a person whose specific role is trying to track and record this client success, because it is very dynamic and it's very client specific, and often the secondary impacts where they've actually acted on the information are the biggest, but they're quite hard to quantify. So we have to work quite a lot with the growers and generate quite a lot of trust to say, well, what was that benefit? Because a lot of growers quite rightly think we're just next year are going to go, okay, well, the subscription goes up. But that's not really how we work. We want to get maximum ROI, go back to our investors and say, look at this impact that we're doing. We need to expand this out.
When you look out to the future, is vertical farming where it's at? Is it the export market? Is it developing some product services for the OEM market? What are some things that you're looking at?
That's a really good question. Our technology works really well in the vertical farming market, but there's still a lot of challenges about where that works and where it doesn't, and how it's distributed. So we do work with a lot of the big players there, but they don't represent a significant proportion of their production in total when compared to like glass. So I think for us, it's mainly strategic partnerships. So I kind of mentioned that we're really focused on the cameras. And a lot of the time, our cameras in things like glass houses are clipped onto irrigation trolleys or spray trolleys, or moved onto like harvesting systems, and really using some of the kind of flagship installs we've done in the past, but get long-term relationships where we say, if you buy a trolley from X Dutch trolley provider, and there's an add-on that has FOTENIX enabled capabilities, a bit like where the kind of Apple CarPlay or the type things in cars initially came on. We kind of want to be selling what we're good at on things we're not good at. We've avoided stepping into automation because there's so much of it. It's done so well and already to a price point that we kind of want to focus on that. So that's the main focus. And I think actually our direction is away from the more controlled environments which are operating now. I think that works fine, but I'm always after kind of the next challenge. And I think the less controlled the environment, the more impact we can make, because the margins are much tighter. So a small change relative to the total margins will be significant. So I'm just looking for that killer use case where we've got a big sort of 12-meter boom system that's running around detecting slugs at the moment, and it used to be doing fungicide things. We're really looking for that killer use where we can put that into a large farm deployment and show what's capable. I think a lot of the challenge in agriculture is it's technically feasible, but what's actually been done and shared and integrated is quite far behind that.
I see you quoted as saying that FOTENIX acts like a translator between crops and machines. What does that actually look like on a working farm?
The purpose of that is really focusing on being kind of like the eye of an agronomist. And we have to be really careful here. We're not prescribing solutions. We're not informing what chemical to use. More, we're providing that person with if you were going to go through with a blanket rate, here's a variable map based on information. And it's assisting rather than automating. We have done quite a lot with robotics, where the idea was to try and integrate that in the loop, but we've not yet seen that work commercially. So most of the machines I'm talking about there, your big sprayers, you're out rolling, anything you're doing a fertilizer application, well, the front half of the tractor could easily be capturing information about the soil and emergence and pests. So I think our real focus is if you're running a machine through it that's currently tracking lots of information like counts, they've got lots of LiDARs and things, how much information. If you're spending money on diesel or electric at the time, let's improve that return on investment for that usage and that resource, and add as much as we can in that. And I think a lot of the focus at the moment is generic or farm based, and we actually want to get it to that plant level where our focus is, where I think the detail starts to actually return on investment rather than, okay, I know what happened last year, this is what I'm going to do next year on year. We've given up on the word unprecedented because the past 4 years have been unprecedented rain, unprecedented sun, changes in supplies, changes in the subsidy landscape, not much changes in the food prices, and that combination has meant that farmers really have to be dynamic. And so the level of information they need to be able to act on with, I think, was it 5 years ago, growers actually would benefit the most by not putting fertilizer on their wheat who would have thought that? It's a crazy market that we're in. Great for us as someone that generates that information, but doesn't have to solve the problem. We just have to tell them how much of a problem it is, and then that has to be ingested. And I don't envy the art that is agriculture, and I do feel quite sort of happy that we're able to alleviate a section of it. But it's a big problem that I think a lot of companies much larger than ours are going to have to band together to be able to support. Otherwise, a lot of developing nations will just outsource food production elsewhere, and throwing labor at the problem hasn't solved the problem previously, and I don't think it will solve the problem going forward.
At this intersection that you're at with, seeing this data, being able to interact with growers around the world, I've also seen you describe building like a metaverse for horticulture. That's the quote I see you saying. If everything goes right with the things you're working on, with the things you see that you can maybe integrate into the products and services you have, what's your view of how this really changes how agriculture operates?
It's a really polarizing statement that I got a lot of feedback on both ways. I think the real point of that was, for me, we've worked quite a lot with companies that are creating virtual environments. Obviously, with what happened with COVID, there was a huge move to a lot of virtual offices and working. And I think I was keen to see if now the technology is there to create effectively quite high fidelity digital twins of farms. And that's been done in kind of manufacturing and processing industries for some time. Well, if we can do that now on farms, what does that mean? Does that mean that farms can get agronomy services at lower rates because the agronomists can view things remotely? Is there capability to sort of, there's a problem, I actually can visibly see it on a screen, on a headset? And that's kind of what we're doing already. We're sending emails, we're sending pictures, we're sending 3D scans of a leaf. You can sort of see on our website what it looks like. Well, can we push that further and host it in an environment like is being created at Meta, like is in video with the Omniverse? And I do think it's technically feasible. It's just at the moment the cost of that happening. And the bigger thing for me is what that means in terms of recruitment. The sector as a whole, irrespective of where you are on the planet, is really struggling to attract young talent. I think it's a branding problem. I think particularly myself, a decade ago, I thought farming was, pitchforks and Wellington boots. And you look at the biggest companies in the world are food and ag companies. As soon as you get to realize that and imagine the amount of technology that's in there, whether you want to call it robotics or software or AI, it's a huge opportunity. And I think that needs to come with showing what's possible. And I think we've seen some quite nice 3D reconstructions of greenhouses or even fields, and those kind of maps you can create. That's the kind of information and tech that I think will bring a new generation to realize there's quite a lot of opportunity. It's very much still a lifestyle rather than a job. I think there's much better ways to burn a few $100,000, but I don't think there's many more rewarding ways. And I think we want to catch the next generation and make sure we get a good supply of farmers. I think the capabilities will shift slightly further away from experience and tradition and more into how you can adopt tech or use tech or be able to sift through all of the tech providers trying to sell to what is an increasing sector. It's becoming a lot more apparent, AgTech. You get a lot of noise with that as well as good exposure.
So I believe you've recently raised some more funding into the company. How has the environment been for raising capital?
I have to speak mostly about the UK. I have a bit of exposure elsewhere, but that's the main focus. In the UK, there's a really good infrastructure for de-risking tech, for demonstrating it. But as soon as you get to the scaling point, there's a real lack. There's a big chasm. And I think they have quite a good infrastructure from the state, from the government to get it to that point. But then when it needs to be handed over is often when companies will move across. They'll go across to the States or across to Europe where there's a better private sector area where they can benefit. And I think convincing venture capital that we have a route to cover that chasm was challenging. We were lucky that we were I mentioned before, we really focused on unit economics. We've been revenue generating for sort of 5 years. So we weren't ever talking about issues with runway. It was mainly about, can we do these things? Can we expand? And so the injection of capital, and it wasn't a lot, it's about $3 million, but it was exclusively for sales and marketing because we've grown quite slowly over time, developing things quite word of mouth. But we were a bit tired of being a best kept secret. And so we're like, right, now we need to make a bit of a bang about it. So we've had a rebrand, we've had a lot completely different infrastructure in how we do our sales pipeline. There's a lot more automation in that kind of setup and a lot more, right, these customers have been absolute rock stars. Let's copy paste that around and kind of spread the word. So it wasn't great. It's getting better. There's a big focus, I think, globally with ESG. But I think a lot of that money goes into biotech or goes into more of the chemical, the green revolution type work. But I think the tech and the hardware side is often scary for investors in particular, because it requires a bit of thought and capital. And ag in particular has much longer return cycles. So for typical firms, they don't want to see that sort of 7-year rather than 3 to 5 years. They normally go for slightly older companies or ones that are closer to that point. It's promising. It's been getting worse and then better. I think the last 18 months have been better than I've seen, but there was a bit of a shortage. Hoping that the shift in focus to real sustainable food and also the shift in focus of nutrition, I think people are starting to realize that tomatoes shipped halfway around the world don't have the same nutritional content as ones from kind of down the road. And that kind of focus will completely change the game in terms of pricing and focus. I believe it's just a bit of an education piece with retailers and consumers to get to that point.
Charles, we're going to be keeping an eye on FOTENIX and how you grow in the future. And we thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you much for having me.